No, I don't believe in that stuff. I don't think so. It is whenever you produce wealth, wealth enhances a nation. And your natural resources are part of the wealth of the nation. Always have been. And my friend, they always will be. Yield back.
Well, I just want to come back to the point you talked about in terms of ethanol, wind, solar. It could be anything. Any time that you take a new energy to commercial level, commercialize it, but you do it artificially. You do it with subsidies. You use taxpayer dollars to sustain it in the market. That's just wrong, and it's not real. If something's ready for prime time, if it's ready to be commercialized, it will stand on its own. It will provide, it'll create a market that people want to come and buy it and use it. And so in terms of, as we look forward to an energy policy, I think we need to be very careful about what we artificially commercialize, what we subsidize. You know, natural gas is real. Oil is real. Both of them will stand on their own. It doesn't need subsidies in order to provide energy for folks. It'll do it in a way that is market proven. But there are other markets out there, and you've named a couple of them, that if we take away those subsidies today, they would collapse. They wouldn't exist. And so, frankly, I think that's a disservice to the American taxpayers. Why are we commercializing energy resources? I do believe in research, and that's where our focus should be. As opposed to prematurely commercializing something that doesn't stand on its own, we really ought to, and I have a lot of appreciation for the national energy labs in this country. They're scientists. They don't have an agenda. They're just looking for that new energy source, and they're very credible in what they do. And that's where our emphasis should be, not prematurely commercializing energies that are unsustainable. We really should be make sure we invest in research and development. I yield back.
Within the last 3 years, I've met two different individuals, one of them very recently, who have a scientific plan to refine garbage at your garbage dump, solid waste, normal, throw it in your garbage can stuff, go out there and through a multiple process produce gasoline and capture all the CO2 to be used. In Texas, we take CO2, put it back down in the ground in old wells and re-energize those wells to bring more oil to the surface. And he can produce, and the leftover after this burning process, to create the gasoline, or refine the gasoline out of garbage, leaves an ash that is good to plow into fields in certain parts of the country to refurbish the fields. That's the kind of thinking we want. That's great. That's a good idea. And because we're talking energy and we're having energy policy, those good ideas come to the fore. That's what we want. That's how we're going to solve this problem. But we're not going to solve it by shutting down what we have now in hopes that there's going to be this miraculous overnight discovery that's just going to make everything great. Like we find some kryptonite or something and it runs the whole country. Wrong. Ain't going to happen. This is a frustrating time for those of us that are in energy-producing states because we have people that literally don't like the production of energy. But they complain about the production of energy. They want to tax it. By the way, the majors, the big boys, they don't get subsidies on their stuff. That's for wildcatters. They drill, but most of their production is overseas. And, you know, we, in some extent, by having bad energy policy in the United States, we have driven people to the benefit of other people in the world. Nobody thought about drilling off the coast of Australia or drilling off the coast of Indonesia, which is a very unstable volcanic area over there, until they were kind of pushed out of American waters. And then they started looking at places like the North Sea, off the coast of Africa, Nigeria, Indonesia. And these are now major production fields. They benefited from our lack of foresight under some administrations to continue to enhance our native industry. More power to them. That's good for them. but we have it here too. And I still think there's plenty of oil in Alaska, lots of it. And they haven't even started looking for natural gas up there. They probably got as much natural gas as anybody. There's an international thing going on most people don't even know about. I learned it from the Coast Guard. Because of the receding ice in the on the North Pole. And God, I'm not going to get off into global warming here today. If that's it, whatever it is, because it's receding, there's now a waterway that goes. There's now a Northwest Passage across the top of the North America. You can sail from the Atlantic to the Pacific. You can also, if that water stays open, you can drill for natural resources there. And the unclaimed international water gets claimed by who puts the most activity in that water. And one of the questions is the Russians are pouring in ships and trawlers and other things into that whole area up there. The part we claim is so much, Canadians claim so much, but there's a lot more that seems to be developing that. And why are they after it? It's not for fish, my friend. It's for oil and gas. Really. Wow. Time goes fast here. Having fun, huh? Thank my friend for joining me.
Thank you.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I actually didn't intend to do this evening, but I got so frustrated with a number of the things I've been watching, both on television and from our brothers and sisters in this body. It became time to actually bring some of the slides we actually do in our town halls back in Arizona. And I like to refer to it as a combination of truth on the numbers and also dispelling some of the political folklore that is rampant both in this town. And look, I'm going to say a number of things this evening that I promise you will offend all sorts of members, all sorts of this Washington, D.C. But look, I'm a freshman. I've been here 140-some days, and Washington, D.C. has systematically not told the truth to the American people. I don't know if they're fearful that looking the American people in the eyes and saying, look, here's what we've done to your future, your kids' future, your grandkids' future, is so scary that they don't get reelected. Well, you know, I got elected to come here and do the numbers. And so my goal is very, very simple. The numbers are straight up. The numbers come from 2010 on a lot of the charts, so we know exactly what was actually spent. And on a number of the charts outside that, we're also going to use the president's numbers. But let's run through this. And we were just watching Judge Carter a couple minutes ago walk through some of the economic impacts of what happens with drilling. And I'm going to even touch through this on the folklore of, well, let's go tax big oil and what it actually produces. First off, the slide right next to me. This one is we put together just to make it simple and visual. Imagine a country that borrows 42 pennies. 42 pennies out of every dollar we spend. We all know that's not sustainable. We can't do this. You couldn't do it in your family budget. You know, think of it. Over the last couple years, it's been tough out there. Your family, my family, we all cinched our belts. The American families got tough and did what was necessary. What did the Congress do? What did this government do? What did Washington, D.C. do? They just kept spending, but the way they spent is they found people who were willing to buy U.S. sovereign debt, and they kept borrowing. And today we now borrow 42 cents out of every dollar. Now, why is that so terrifying? Well, it's terrifying because when you start to realize the speed the debt is growing, and then you start to understand some of the other drivers in that debt. One of the things that happened January 1st this year, You know, what was the big change? Baby boomers. Every 8 seconds, someone turns 65 in this country for the next 18 years. So think of that. 10,000 a day for the next 18 years. And that's why you see many of us around here saying, we need to tell the truth, how devastatingly ugly these numbers are, and that if we step up and deal with it now, we can fix it. But you can't deal with it with a bunch of silly rhetoric. So let's walk through some more of these slides. Right here is the 2010, and you see this blue. The blue is, we'll call it mandatory spending, entitlements, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, interest on the debt. But look when you step up. When you step up just what is functionally 4 budget years from now, because we just did the 2012 budget, looking at 2016, you start to realize the growth in the spending, the growth in the entitlements. And one of the things that keeps not being shared with the American people is when you look at our 2010 and the 2011 number here would be out a little bit further, we don't take in enough revenue today to even cover the mandatory spending. If you see our revenue line, it cuts through right about here. So think of that. Every dime of defense is borrowed. Every single dime of discretionary is borrowed, and we're about $100 billion short on even covering the entitlements, the mandatory spending. We borrow a little piece of those dollars that go into the entitlements, and it continues to explode in the future years. And I know these are a lot of slides, but when we get down to the ending part, I think you're going to find some of them sort of fun. But we first have to walk through sort of an understanding of the pie chart. This is 2010. 2010, the mandatory spending was sitting about 63%, 62% of all the spending in government. Defense Department, other discretionary. And when I said all the spending in government, understand things like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac aren't even part of this. They're off the books on this. Now, when you look at this line here, that blue, look how fast it starts to move up. In 2016, it goes from here, where we're about 63%, and now we hit 72%. Think of that. We just did what? The 2012 budget. 2016, 4 budget cycles from now, the mandatory spending, the entitlements, are consuming 72% of our budget. And the amazing thing is, in that cycle, the money that is going to discretionary, actually we predict to go down in those 4 years. So you start to understand the mandatory is consuming what we are. So you get folks who start to raise their hands at some of the town halls and say, well, why not just raise the marginal tax rates? You know, let's go out and tax everyone a little bit more. There's some fascinating math on that, and we got 60 years of history looking at it. And this is one of my favorite charts, and for someone that wants to follow this, you can actually go, and I have a tough last name, it's Schweikert. It's S-C-H-W-E-I-K-E-R-T, house.gov. You'll see these charts on there. This is when we had very high marginal tax rates, back in the 40s, 50s, early 60s. Very high marginal tax rates. Over here is where we have very low marginal tax rates. And there's this normalizing effect, and there's actually a couple PhDs who've written very detailed papers on this normalizing effect where even during times of very high marginal tax rates, very low marginal tax rates, guess what happens? We take in about 18.2% of gross domestic product. I don't know, maybe in the math out there, maybe in the logic out there, maybe in the human nature there, when you tax people a lot, they find other ways to take their income. Maybe when you tax them low, they are willing to work more hours. But somehow, high marginal tax rates, low marginal tax rates, we basically take in the same percentage of gross domestic product, of GDP. It hits that 18.2%. So when folks look at you in the eye and say, oh, just raise marginal tax rates, we're going to tax the rich more, we're going to tax everyone more, it doesn't do it. It doesn't take care of this massive debt that is consuming us as a people. What you have to do is you have to grow that line, which is the size of the economy. You must grow this economy. Because as you start to look through these numbers, you come to the realization Yeah, we have a huge spending problem, but we can never cut enough. We have to grow because it's two sides of this pendulum, and both of them have to be in motion. We have to grow, and we have to cut the spending, and we have to deal with the reality, the mandatory spending, the entitlements are eating us alive. Let's actually start to walk on some of what I consider, what I like to refer to as political folklore. When we hold many of our town halls back in my district, and I'm blessed to represent Arizona's 5th district, it's an amazingly wonderful place. It's Scottsdale and Tempe, Fountain Hills and Nawatuki and Mesa. We'll often get hands that will pop up in the back of the room saying, well, you know, Mr. Schweikert or David, why don't we do this? If we'll go out there and we would tax big oil, we could balance the budget, right? And they mean well. They honestly, I believe the participants at our town halls really mean well when they raise that hand because they've seen members of this body tell them that. And they haven't been told the truth. When you look at the numbers, here's 2011, hard dollars. Well, and let's call it, you can call them the subsidies, you can call them the depletion allowances, you can call them the incentives to drill and produce more petroleum products, but the gray here is fossil fuels. And just for comparison, we also put the $8.72 billion of the subsidies that go into green energy. But for the fun of it, let's just talk about this part right here, the $2.44 billion that's in 2011. Well, think about this. If you're borrowing about 4.7 every single day, how can a member of Congress look in the camera, look at you, and say, well, if we would just tax big oil more, maybe that would help solve the debt problem? It doesn't even make a drop in the bucket. And we can have a little fun with this because I've been trying to find a way to talk about big numbers. You know, I was blessed in my previous life. You know, I've lived in a world of big numbers. But how do you visualize $1 trillion? How do you visualize $1 billion? How do you visualize $1 million for many people? So we've been playing with the idea of let's make it time. So if your government right now is borrowing about $4.7 billion every single day, so let's just think about $4.7 billion every single day, those taxes on big oil, hell, let's make it this. Let's do it taxes on all. Let's just remove those depletion allowances, those tax credits, which are also types of depreciation that all other businesses get, but let's just wipe them all out. Guess what it buys you? It buys you about 2.2 minutes of borrowing a day. Now, how many of you feel like you've been told that? You know, once again, we're engaging in, often around this place, political theater instead of math. And that's been one of my greatest frustrations in my short time here, is I wish I saw more members carrying around their financial calculators so they could look the American people in the eyes and tell them the truth. But think of that. The whole, we'll call it fossil fuels subsidies, tax credits, depreciation allowances, incentives to drill, would buy you about 2.2 minutes a day. Oh, come on. And that's just assuming that every dollar came in and you didn't slow the economy down and didn't slow energy drilling down or energy production down. So this is just throwing your hands up and saying, let's just pretend for a moment that we got rid of those and it becomes pure income. Well, let's actually go to the next level, because there's always that other person that raises their hands and says, well, David, I've heard that if we would go out and we would tax the rich more. You remember that lame duck Congress last December extended what a lot of folks call the Bush tax cuts. Now around here we often call them the Bush-Obama tax cuts because President Obama's the one that signed them in December. But they extended those tax cuts. And weren't those tax cuts for the rich? And wouldn't that balance the budget? Well, back to that small problem called math. Let's pretend for a moment that they hadn't happened. And let's pretend that it didn't slow down the economy. And let's pretend every dime that some folks have predicted came in, which, you know, hey, a lot of this place operates in a fantasy world. Why can't we? So we never had the tax extensions that happened in December. What would it buy you? Well, we borrow, once again, we borrow $4.7 billion every single day. it would buy you about 28 minutes. Think of that. 28 minutes. So now I'm at my town hall. I've had two hands go up. The first one saying, well, David, what if we did what I've heard, if we would tax big oil and that would balance the budget? Well, what did we learn on the last slide? Well, that was about 2.2 minutes of borrowing every day. Well, and then the other hand goes up saying, well, if we would tax the rich more. Matter of fact, why don't we do in this slide, the tax extenders never happened. So everyone, rich, poor, in middle class, didn't get the benefit of that extension of the tax cuts last December. Well, guess what? That buys you 28 minutes. So think of it. We're doing really well here. We're up to now, what, 28 minutes plus 2.2 minutes. So now let's see. What if we do this? Because there's always the other hand that goes up and says, David, I bet you we could balance the budget and wouldn't have this debt and deficits if we did this. We tax big oil, and those Bush-Obama tax extenders that happened last December in the lame duck session, we never had that because those helped the rich. Oh, and by the way, if we had never had the wars, you know, if we didn't have Afghanistan, if we didn't have Iraq, and I believe actually in our number here, it didn't even have Libya, we could balance the budget then, couldn't we? So we actually, literally a couple hours ago, sat down and said, let's add it up. And let's make it on a per-hour basis so the American people can understand the crazy spending that's going on around this place and how fast the numbers are eroding on us. So back again, our math. We borrow 4.7 billion every single day. And let's go back to our pretend world. Every dime of those oil subsidies and depreciation allowances and tax credits come in, and it doesn't actually slow down jobs or the economy. And every dime of those taxes were to come in, even though it probably, if you did that, you'd slow down the economy, people would work less, you'd have less jobs. But we're living in our fantasy world here. And because we didn't have the wars, none of that money would be going out the door, even though certain portions of that are actually already built into the defense budget. But every dime that's equated to Iraq, Afghanistan, and now Libya, well, what would it buy us? Well, we're borrowing that $4.7 billion a day. Guess what? Buys you 3 hours of borrowing. Think about what you've heard around here. How many people you've seen walk up in front of a microphone and a camera and look you in the eyes and say, well, if we did these things, we wouldn't have this debt. They're not telling you the truth. All those together are only 3 hours of borrowing. And let's see, if I remember correct, there's what, like 24 hours in a day? I'm looking for some honest discussion about the other 21 hours a day. And you got to go back to those first boards that I put up and have an honest discussion about the entitlements, about the mandatory spending, because they are what are exploding on us. They are what are consuming us as a people. We can do this. We can save the future for our kids and our grandkids. We can make sure that these programs exist, but we have to do it rationally. And we have to, for once, do it honestly, fact-based, maybe someone actually holding a calculator, because the rhetoric around here, the political folklore around here, when they're willing to look you in the eyes and base their whole world on something that only buys you 3 hours of borrowing a day, you're not being told the truth. All these slides, and we try to add literally 2 or 3 or 4 of them a week. We're engaging in a little project. We're a freshman office, but we have some very smart young people who are very good with their calculators. And we're trying very hard to find a way to make these gigantic numbers digestible so we can all understand them, so we can have a rational conversation of how we save our country. So if you'll go to that schweikert.house.gov, you're going to find a number of these slides. Matter of fact, all of them on there, and every week, I promise you, there's going to be more coming. And maybe if we all start to tell each other the truth about the math, we can actually tell the truth about how we're going to save the country. And, Mr. Speaker, with that, I yield back the remainder of my time, and I make a motion that the House do be at recess.
Does the gentleman make a motion to adjourn?
I do.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed? Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow for morning hour debate.
In the House today, members debated a bill dealing with offshore drilling permits, which members began work on last week. 11 amendments